Welcome to Tabletop Tactics. My name is Lawrence, this is Joe, and together we'll be taking you through how to play Warhammer 40,000 10th Edition.
We've both been playing 40k for many years and we are so excited to show you how to get started. If you're new to the game and considering giving it a go, or if you're an existing player and wanting to learn about the changes from previous editions, there is something here for everyone.
Although the setting of 40k is dark and brutal and beset by war raging across the galaxy, the spirit of the game is quite the opposite. It's designed to be a shared experience, enjoyed between friends, over a kitchen table, or amongst potential friends at gaming events.
There's no single player mode here, so friendly and cooperative play is heavily encouraged. And in doing so, sets players up for unforgettable experiences at the gaming table. Encourage success on both sides, commiserate when you obliterate your opponent's newly painted unit, but most importantly, lose yourself in the immersion of the game and the enjoyment of a shared experience with your friends.
Before we get started, there are some things that you're going to need in order to wage war on the tabletop. A tape measure that shows inches, a set of 6-sided dice, a selection of miniatures for you and your opponent, and finally, a space to cool your battlefield. Ideally, you'll have some terrain to put on the battlefield as the game plays much better with it and creates a more immersive experience. But if you're just starting out, you can use coffee cups or books to represent ruined buildings and battlefield debris.
If you're new to 40k and looking for a quick start, you and a friend can purchase the Leviathan box game, which has a selection of Space Marines and Tyranids, as well as the core rules and mission cards. But for the first time, the core rules are free and available online from Games Workshop, if you prefer to start with some different miniatures.
Assuming you've now got the core elements needed to play, let's have a closer look at the miniatures and how their rules work in games of 40k. Today, we've decided to take a small Space Marine force which will be facing off against the alien threat known as the Tyranids. The Space Marines are an elite army composed of genetically enhanced super soldiers. Clad in power armor and utilizing specialist combat doctrines to take out enemies at range or in brutal close quarters combat. Wielding a variety of weapons from high caliber bolt guns to vicious chainswords, these elite killers were created for one purpose alone: the extermination of any threat to the Imperium of Man.
Facing them is an alien threat of immeasurable size, swarming across the galaxy and consuming all life before it. Driven with the single-minded intent of the hive mind, the Tyranids fight in unison, looking to strip the biomass of every species in their path.
Let's take a look at our Space Marine army from the Ultramarines chapter. This Terminator captain will be leading our force today, with a unit of 5 Terminators under his command. We also have a squad of close combat specialists called Blade Guard Veterans, a unit of Eradicators wielding devastating ranged weapons called Melter Rifles, and a hulking Ballistus Dreadnoughts to deal with enemy armor. We also have a fast unit of Inceptors capable of flying across the battlefield, and finally a vehicle called an Impulsor that can transport one of our infantry units safely across the battlefield.
So let's take a look at all the individual units that make up our Tyranids army. Leading the force today is a Neuro-Tyrant, a terrifying creature that can unleash psychic screams into enemy units as well as protecting the units it's leading. Next we have a unit of Termagants. This is my basic troops unit, and they are here to help keep control of the battlefield. These Tyranid warriors here are ferocious predators armed with both ranged bioweapons and close quarters claws. We have some flying units next. Gargoyles here act similarly to Termagants but have the ability to move fast and can fly over enemy units. And this is a parasite of Mortrex. It can move quickly like the Gargoyles but also has the ability to infect enemy units with parasites. Lovely! Moving on then, we have a stealthy unit next called Leapers, which are hard to hit and can infiltrate the battlefield to gain advantage over my opponent. And lastly, we have some big, scary monsters. This Maleceptor is a giant beast that's tough to bring down as well as having devastating psychic abilities. And finally, rounding off the force is this Screamer Killer. This is probably the most iconic unit in the new Leviathan box set, but but also provides me a brutal close combat asset for my army that will hopefully rip those Ultramarines to pieces.
Now we've covered what's in our armies, let's go over what they can do in the game. Each of the units in our army have a unit data card which gives us all the rules we need to use them in our game today. Let's start off with our Space Marine Captain. This is a data card and shows us all of the elements of what our unit can do. These will be available as physical cards or available online for free from Games Workshop. Across the top we have the unit's name and underneath a series of letters and numbers. M is for movement and shows us the speed in which a model moves across the battlefield and is measured in inches. In this case, our Terminator Captain can move 5 inches. T is toughness and determines how resilient he is to enemy attacks. SV is the saving characteristic, indicating the protection a model's armor gives them. W is the wounds characteristic, showing how much damage the model can sustain before it succumbs to its injuries. If a model's wounds characteristic is reduced to 0, it is destroyed. LD is leadership and is a value that shows the bravery, determination, or self-control of the model. The lower the value, the better the model's leadership is. OC is objective control and shows how effectively a model can wield control over an objective on the battlefield. The characteristics of ranged and melee weapons a model is equipped with are shown in the section underneath. The range shows how far a weapon can shoot, and weapons with a range of melee can only be used in close combat. A is for attacks and shows how many attacks are made each time the weapon is used. BS is ballistic skill and determines how accurately the bearer can shoot its ranged weapons. WS is weapon skill and reflects the bearer's skill when using the relevant close combat weapon. S is strength and how likely the weapon is to wound an enemy. AP is armor penetration, which shows the weapon's ability to shred through the foe's defenses. D is for damage and determines the amount of damage inflicted by a successful wound. Most units have special abilities shown here on the right of the data card which apply during the game. These can highlight anything from core rules shared by your entire army to bespoke rules related to specific units, psychic abilities, and invulnerable saves, which we'll cover later.
On the back of the card, we have a few more things to cover. Some units will have war gear options which are shown here. You can use the options shown to change the war gear loadout of your model to suit how you want them to wage war. Unit composition will show the number and types of models in a unit and the default war gear they are armed with. It will also show what units a model can attach to if it is a leader. In this case, our captain can join a squad of up to 10 Terminators and lead them into battle.
Now we've covered what's in our armies, let's go over what they can do in the game. The first thing we need to do is select a mission. This will tell us how to muster our armies, how to create the battlefield with objective markers and terrain, and deploy your army on the tabletop. It will also tell us any special rules that apply to the battle, as well as what players need to do to win the game. We're going to jump into the action quickly by selecting the only war mission found in the core rulebook. But players can also choose a mission from the Leviathan mission deck included in the Leviathan box, which gives players countless mission options to deliver a different game every time. Now we've selected our mission, we can now follow the steps shown to get ready to play. First, we'll select our battle size. This will determine how many points we can spend on forging our army, as well as how long the game is likely to last. Points are a measure of a unit's power on the battlefield, and the higher their points value, the more powerful that unit is. The points values for every army will be available online for free from Games Workshop.
Next, players write down their selected army lists. This can be done digitally, using various apps including the Warhammer 40,000 app, or simply written down on a piece of paper and shared with their opponent, including your selected army faction, detachment rules, your chosen units, and your warlord.
When selecting your units, you must include at least one character, and each time you include a unit in your army, record any war gear options, upgrades or enhancements it has access to, as well as its points value. You can include as many units in your army as you like, as long as you don't exceed the points limit for your chosen battle size. One of your character models must be selected as your army's warlord and noted in your list. They will be the leader of your army.
Your selected units must all have the same faction keyword, and you can take up to 3 units using the same datasheet in your army. or up to 6 that have the battle line or dedicated transport keywords found at the bottom of the unit's data card.
The only other restriction to unit types selected for your list are epic heroes. They are amongst the most famous, or probably infamous, warriors in the entire galaxy and are unique and named characters with endless battle honors, titles and conquests, and thus you can only include one of these units in your army.
Characters in your army can be given enhancements. These are special upgrades that can be bestowed upon your finest leaders to give them special abilities. These can range from increasing their lethality in combat, or improving their ability to lead their warriors to victory through precision strategy. Each character can take one unique enhancement, and you can take up to 3 enhancements across your army list.
Now our army lists are complete, we can read our mission objectives. Each mission will state what the primary objectives are and can often include one or more special rules outlining unique situations, scenarios, and abilities that can be used in the battle.
Each mission will include details on the size of the battlefield that you will need. The most common size is 44 by 60 inches, and there are many maps made specifically for games of 40k that are available just like the one that we have here. In regards to terrain pieces, there are guidelines available from the 10th edition core rules on how many pieces to use and where to set them up, and will look something like this.
Next comes our first dice roll of the game to determine who is the attacker, who is the defender, and in which portion of the board they'll deploy their armies. Players roll off and the winner is the attacker, their opponent is the defender. The mission will show both players which section of the battlefield is their deployment zone.
Next, both players will make a note of which leader units are attached to a bodyguard unit, which of their units will be embarked within transports, and which of their units will start the game in reserves.
Players then alternate deploying their units, starting with the attacker wholly within their designated deployment zones, continuing setting up units in this manner until both players have deployed all their units onto the battlefield.
And now we're ready to begin our game. And to determine who goes first, both players roll off and the winner takes first turn. Now we know Lawrence is going first, we can resolve any pre-battle rules shown on our unit's data cards. For example, the Leapers can infiltrate and the Terminators can deep strike. And now we can begin the battle. Here we go. We're at the board, we've just finished deployment, and we're ready to begin our first game of 10th edition, which is very exciting indeed.
Yeah.
So in terms of our armies, as you can see, they're on the board here. You might see some units are outside of the restricted deployment zones. This unit of Leapers over here are able to do that because on their data card, they have an ability called Infiltrate, which means that they can be deployed anywhere on the board as long as they're 9 inches or more away from enemy units and the enemy deployment zone.
Right, whereas I've got a unit of Terminators and their leader, which has joined them, the Terminator Captain, in Deep Strike, because they have the Deep Strike ability, which means that they can appear on the battlefield 9 inches away from the opponent in turn 2 onwards.
Very scary as well.
Very scary. So mission-wise, we are playing the only war mission, as we've stated from the main rulebook, with 4 objectives strewn across the battlefield here, and each objective is worth 1 victory point starting from the 2nd battle round, and that it's scored at the end of the command phase at the beginning of the battle round 2. So you can only score a maximum of 3 points in this way every turn, and at the end of the game, the person whose army is destroyed automatically loses. But if you've both got some models remaining, then the person who has the most victory points scored throughout the game is the victor.
Indeedy. This is the one mission for this size of game in the rulebook. In the Leviathan box, you do also have this card set as well, which has a heap of different missions which give you variety, as we mentioned earlier on in this how to play video. So now we're in the command phase. We get a command point each.
We do.
It'd be worth having some kind of token to track that as you go through. These are available from us at tabletoptactics.tv/shop. Get yours now! But with your command points, you can spend those on various different stratagems. There's a couple of pages in the core rulebook, and there's also some available for every faction in their data card set.
Perfect. So with no further ado, you have to roll to see who goes first.
My goodness! Why don't you go ahead and go first? Strong start.
A bold start.
Not so bold, but that's fine. Good luck, sir! The battle begins!
So, as I am going first, and it is my command phase, and I've gained my command points, what I'm actually going to do is I've got the option to use a combat doctrine, which is my detachment rule. I'm actually going to save them for later, because I've only got 3 to choose from, and I want to use them at an appropriate time. But what I am going to do is use my army special rule, which is called Oath of Moment. And what that allows me to do is pick an enemy unit, and then I'll be able to re-roll hits and wounds against you. All of my units in my army which would be eligible for this. So I'm going to pick your Screamer Killer. Okay, so now we're in the movement phase, and because it's my movement phase, I can select a unit, and it can either make a normal move, it can advance, or it can remain stationary. The distance a unit can move is shown on its data card under M, and we can move a unit any distance up to its move characteristic, which in this case is 8 inches with my Ballistus Dreadnought. The only restriction is that you cannot move within engagement range of an enemy unit, which is 1 inch. My next unit to move now are these Eradicators, which are just about to move around this terrain piece. In regards to the terrain we have set up on our board, the models we're moving can move over a terrain feature, but not through it. For example, a model can climb over a fence or a wall, but not straight through it. Models can move freely over terrain 2 inches in height or less, but can measure up and down a taller terrain feature, deducting that distance from its movement characteristics. Models can't end their move mid-climb, so if it's not possible to end a move as a result, that move can't be made. One final quirk of movement is units that can fly. Any units that have fly on their data card can move over enemy models when they make a normal move, advance, or fall back. Fly models that include any horizontal movement onto terrain features measure diagonally when doing so. The last unit to move is this Impulsor, and it's going to do an advance move. Any model can advance in the movement phase, and to do so, roll a d6 and add the value to the unit's movement characteristic. The only thing to bear in mind when doing an advance move is that a model cannot shoot any of its weapons that turn following an advance move, unless they are equipped with a weapon with the Assault keyword. Next, I'm going to move the Repulsor just around this building so that I can get line of sight on targets in the shooting phase. And now we enter my shooting phase. So, as it's my shooting phase, I can select any of my units, check their datasheet, and attack with all of the weapons on their profile, depending on the type of weapons that they are. I cannot pick the Impulsor this turn because I've just advanced with it and it doesn't have any weapons with the Assault keyword. So instead, I will begin with the Ballistus Dreadnought. Now the Ballistus Dreadnought is going to target your Screamer Killer, which if you remember back to my command phase, is my unit that I selected for the Oath of Moment, meaning I can re-roll my hits and my wounds against you.
Oh no!
So I'm going to use my 2 big guns, because that seems appropriate. And we will begin with the Ballistus Missile Launcher, which has 2 attacks on the profile, and it hits on a 3, 4, 5, or a 6. I hit you both times.
Didn't even need the rerolls.
Didn't need the reroll. I now wound you on a 3+, because my strength is 10, but you are very tough at toughness 9.
Toughness 9, yes.
Now, if I was double your toughness, I would wound you on a 2+, but because my strength is better, but not double, I wound on a 3+.
Very good.
So 3s or more. I wound you once, but I can re-roll the wound with the Oath of Moment. And I get 2 6s.
So, your AP characteristic on the missile is 2, correct? Right. Okay, very good. Now, because I have a armor save of a 2+, that means that that is then reduced by 2 because of your armor penetration ability. Because I'm in front of this terrain piece here and partially visible, that gives me a +1 to my cover save.
Yeah, the wall is in between the firing model and the target.
Indeed.
Yeah.
So that means I get a 3-up save instead of a 4-up, which I ordinarily would do. And he's okay.
But you need another wound.
Oh yes, of course I do. He's not okay.
Oh! So a wound goes through. Okay, well, now I have to consult the damage, which is D6 on the Ballistus Crack variant.
Okay.
So how many points of damage do you take? It's just the 1.
Okay.
So you reduce your wounds by 1 now. What does that make your wounds?
So I'm now down to 9 wounds remaining. I started on 10, but you have blown off a piece of my carapace.
So that just leaves the Ballistus Las Cannon. Also has 2 attacks on the profile, also hitting on a 3+. Right, well, one has hit on a 3, but with Oath of Moment, I can re-roll the other one that missed. Both hit on a 3.
Very good.
Okay, now to wound you, I am strength 12 this time. Sadly, it's still not double your toughness, so it's still a 3+. And I can re-roll with the Oath of Moment. That's 2 wounds. Now, I don't want to alarm you or you guys at home, but the AP on this one is -3.
So more difficult for me to say. We should also mention for everyone following along, the re-rolling on Oath of Moment is specifically for Space Marines. So this isn't for every faction, this is their special faction.
That's their detachment rule. Yeah.
So I've got 2 saves to make, do I?
That's right.
Very good. So now this will now be on a 4-up save.
That's right.
So 2 wounds.
That's right.
I'm a bit nervous.
Oh, you failed both.
Okay. Now this would be a good moment to show off one of our stratagems because I could potentially take a huge amount of damage here from those devastating las cannons. So I'm going to use the command reroll stratagem, which will allow me to reroll one of these dice. There's loads of stratagems you can use, but in this instance, it feels prudent to try and keep him alive for a bit longer. So I'm going to use my command point, which I've got in my command phase, to reroll the result of this saving throw.
Oh, nice.
Okay, that may have saved my bacon.
Right, well, my damage on the Ballistic Las Cannon is D6 +1.
Okay.
So now I will roll this D6. I rolled off the dice tray, but I did get a 4 and I add 1 to it, so 5.
Okay.
And that will reduce you from 9 wounds down to 4 wounds.
He's struggling now. You blew a big hole in my Screamer Killer.
Did.
He's not dead though.
No.
He is gravely wounded, but he's alive and hopefully for long enough that he can do some damage in my turn.
That's right.
Which, yes.
But what we should also say as well is that I wasn't able to target the Screamer Killer and try and finish him off because this large structure in the middle, which we're counting as a ruin today, has the obscuring keyword, which means that you cannot see through it because it's over 5 inches high.
Exactly.
So your Screamer Killer was hidden from the repulsor.
But now,
so now that we've covered an example of how a unit shoots another unit, and we've seen some terrain interaction too, it's now time to get an example of a fight in the fight phase, which I'm sure will happen in your turn 1.
I hope so. Yeah, so ordinarily we then move on to the charge phase and the fight phase as the next part of a player turn. Based on where the Space Marines are at the moment, there's not anything that's able to declare a charge and then move on to the fighting phase, but there should be plenty over here for the Tyranids to get their claws into. So it'll be my turn in a minute. Right, so it comes to the Tyranids turn 1. We're in the command phase. We both gained a command point as we did in the previous command phase for the Space Marines. And part of the command phase is the new Battle Shock mechanic. So in the Battle Shock step of the command phase, I must make Battle Shock tests for each of my units on the battlefield that is below half strength. If a unit has a starting strength of 1, like my Screamer Killer, then it's said to be below half strength, whilst its remaining number of wounds is less than half of its wounds characteristic. For any other unit, while the number of models in that unit is less than half of its starting strength, that unit is said to also be below half strength. So because my Screamer Killer counts as being below half strength, I must now make a Battle Shock test. I roll 2d6, and if the result is greater or equal to my leadership characteristic, the test is passed. Otherwise, the test is failed until the start of my next command phase, that unit is Battle Shocked. Now, because of my Tyranid's army rule called Synapse, this allows me to roll 3d6 instead of 2d6 when I'm taking any Battle Shock tests. That comes into effect when I'm within 6 inches of any other Tyranid units in my army. Unfortunately, on 3d6, I still fail. So because I failed the Battle Shock test, my objective control characteristic for my Screamer Killer is now 0, so he's unable to control objectives. If I fall back, I have to make a desperate escape test for the unit, which we'll cover later. And on top of that, I can't use any stratagems that will affect my Screamer Killer until my next command phase. Well, that's that. I mean, he has been shot by a las cannon.
I guess it makes sense. He's got a little bit of battle shock. He's shrugging off the wounds. Right?
I'd be shocked if it was me. So that's the command phase done. Battle Shock has been completed. So now I'll move on to my movement phase.
Great.
That's my movement phase complete. As you can see, I've swarmed forward as much as I can with my Tyranid units. I have kept a couple of units on the objective so I can get the points for our mission in this game.
In the next turn.
In my next turn, exactly, because they're scored in the command phase from turn 2
round
onwards.
2, yep.
Exactly. So ordinarily we now move on to the shooting phase and unleash some biocannons, etc. But because we've already covered that in the Space Marines turn, we'll move on to what we didn't cover with Space Marines, which is the charge phase and the fight phase. So based on where I am at the moment, I've made a normal move with my Screamer Killer down there. Although he has a rather large hole in his carapace at the moment, he is still able to charge. So as it stands, I am just over 7 inches away from this impulsor here, which means I can make a charge because it is less than 12 inches away from me,
right.
which are the parameters. Engagement range, which is what you need to be in to get into combat, is 1 inch. So because I'm just over 7 inches away, I need to roll a 6+ on 2d6.
Hey, good luck.
Come on, Screamer Killer.
He's done it.
7.
Nice.
Marvelous. Well, we'll move him in and then we'll get ready for the fight phase. It's the fight phase. So I have done my charge move. I've piled in, but because you are the closest model within base-to-base contact, that's pretty much as far as he can go.
Yeah.
If you have larger units, you can sort of move around and get more models into base-to-base contact to do more attacks. But for now, I have 1 giant monster fighting your Impulsor.
Right.
So I have 10 attacks with my Screamer Killer Talons. My weapon skill is 3 for him, so I'll be hitting you on 3 pluses with these d6. Not bad.
Oh, that's a lot of hits.
Not bad at all. So a couple of misses there, but I have hit you 8 times. My strength with my talons is 10.
My toughness is 9.
So it'll be 3s to wound you.
Yeah, because your strength is greater than my toughness. Okay.
Not bad at all. So
Ouch, 5 wounds.
5 wounds go through with the talons.
Just like with shooting, there's an AP modifier for this melee weapon. What's the AP?
The AP is 2.
2, and I have a base armor save of 3+.
6.
So I need 5s. How many wounds was it? 5.
Indeed.
I need 5 5s or 6s. And I only make 1.
Wow.
So what's the damage?
The damage for those attacks are damage 3.
Oh!
So that means that 12 wounds have gone through to your Impulsor.
Well, I only have 11 wounds.
That means it is destroyed, sir.
Ouch.
How exciting.
Well, I have the Deadly Demise rule being a vehicle, and that means that on the roll of a 6, I would do, in this instance, D3 mortal wounds in a 6-inch radius.
It explodes.
It explodes.
Yes.
Does it explode? It doesn't.
It doesn't explode.
Okay, that now brings me to the unit inside. I have 6 Blade Guard veterans, which means I need to roll 1d6 for each model inside the Impulsor. On the roll of a 1, I will take mortal wounds. 1 mortal wound for each roll of a 1. Do take 2 mortal wounds.
Okay.
So one of the Blade Guard veterans is very badly wounded, but now they must disembark the destroyed transport and end their move wholly within 3 inches of the vehicle.
Indeed. So mortal wounds, we should explain, ignore saving throw characteristics, essentially. So any mortal wounds that go through, they're so grievous that the armor does nothing.
Goes right through onto my wound profile. Ouch.
So that's everything disembarked.
That's right. It's 1 Blade Guard holding on by a thread.
Just about, yeah.
Will you consolidate?
Yes, so consolidation now will be done with the Screamer Killer. This is done after you've completed the fight step, which he has done very successfully. So you can move up to 3 inches, as you can see over here. Yep. So he can then move in to engagement range, no less, with your Blade Guard veterans.
You do, and when you do that consolidation step, you must move towards the closest enemy model as well if you are within 3 inches. So in this instance, you've gone right into the Blade Guard veteran who draws his blade with the rest of his squad, and I could now activate in the fight phase as it would be my turn to do so. Yeah. However, we'll have to leave that to your imagination. We can only assume that the Astartes would of course cut the Screamer Killer down. So we begin my turn 2, command phase, Normally I'll be doing things like Battle Shock here, but as I have no units which are eligible to make a Battle Shock test, because they're all over half strength and there are no other rules affecting them, I can go straight on to my other things, such as the army rules again and the combat doctrines. This turn I'm going to pick the Assault Doctrine for the first time, and that will allow my units to advance and charge.
Powerful.
Might be nice for those tasty Blade Guard, which did indeed cut down your Screamer Killer.
It did, look, you killed him, my boy!
So, with no further ado, I will also now put my Oath of Moment ability, which is to reroll hits and wounds, onto your Psychic Malceptor.
Oh dear.
Now, at the end of the command phase, we can now show a great example of me scoring 1 victory point for having my Eradicators within 3 inches of that objective. Now, I am only holding the 1 objective, so I will only get the 1 victory point this turn, but that's a good start, and hopefully I can score some more later on. I also, being a command phase, gain 1 command point, as do you. Because both players gain the command point in each command phase. So with no further ado, we've got a couple of extra examples that we want to show you in game so that you've got full grips with the rules. Let's do some special embarkation movement. Now with an embarkation move, I can move the Eradicators to within 3 inches of the repulsor. If they're within 3 inches of the repulsor, they can then embark on this transport, allowing it to move off and carry them inside. Also, if the repulsor had the firing deck special rule, these Eradicators would be able to shoot out of it, depending on the number next to the firing deck value, i.e. firing deck 3 would allow each Eradicator to fire 1 weapon each. Sadly, the repulsor doesn't have the firing deck rule, so we'll just have to act as a transport here. Now at the end of my movement phase, I've moved my Repulsor, Inceptors, the Ballistus Dreadnought back to hold the objective, and the Blade Guard have advanced as I'm in the Combat Doctrine, which will set them up for a charge in my later phases. Now, however, at the end of the movement phase, my Terminators, led by the Captain, use their Deep Strike rule to arrive just over 9 inches away from all enemy models. This will set me up for a charge, also in the charge phase, where I'm eyeing up the Termagants holding the objective. Skipping forward to the charge phase, let's see if I can make that 9-inch charge. Now that I've completed the charge move, it's time to pile in the fight phase. Here, my Captain has to pile in closer to the closest model, which is this Termagant here, but he is allowed to go around it as he will still end his move closer whilst also getting closer to this one. The other remaining Terminator here has to pile into this Termagant, and so forth. It continues, each model piling in. If it can make base contact, it must do so to the closest enemy model. As we mentioned before, the OC or objective control value on our unit's data cards determine how effectively they can exert their control over objectives on the battlefield. In the Space Marine charge phase, the Terminators made a 9-inch charge from Deep Strike, moving into engagement range of the Termagaunts and within the 3-inch range required to contest this objective. In this example, Joe's Termagants have an OC of 2, where my Terminators have an OC of 1. So at full strength, the Termagants count as 20 models, where the Terminators only count as 6. So the Termagants control the objective currently. However, in the subsequent fight phase, the Terminators destroyed 8 of the Termagants in combat and suffered no casualties in return. So now the OC value of the Termagants is 4 to the Terminator's OC of 6, meaning the objective is now controlled by the Terminators. This means in the next turn, the Tyranids have been denied a point for holding an objective for the mission. And there we have it. So with my turn 2 complete, the Valiant Terminators have cut the Termagants down.
Nice move.
Thank you. And now, with the last few examples of 10th edition in the bag, let's wrap up and cover the summary. And there you have it. We've covered every phase of Warhammer 40,000 10th edition. The command, the movement, the shooting, the charge, and we finished with the fight phase.
That should be enough to get you started in your games of 10th edition. Now, the game is simplified, compared to previous editions, but certainly not simple.
No.
The thing you need to bear in mind as you start playing your games at 10th edition is that the core rules are available for free online. That includes all of the things you need to know for any army, because also the index cards will also be available online. So anything you need, if you get stuck in your games, if you go to Games Workshop, you can get access to all of that stuff so you can pick up if you do get stuck at any point.
That's right. And we hope that the examples that we provided in this How to Play have given you a good, real understanding of what the units can do and how the data sheets work and how they work in conjunction with the rules of the game. So for now, I've been Lawrence, he's been Joe. This has been a How to Play from Tabletop Tactics. We'll see you in another video very soon.